Now, at the moment, we are before arbitration in respect of our landlord. We're before Caston QC, and that hearing is continuing at the moment. But we do expect a favourable result over the next couple of weeks. And from the evidence which has been coming out of that hearing, it will probably, and in fact I'd put it at about 80% chance, that at the end of that hearing, based upon the evidence which has been presented to that arbitration, we are going to finally challenge the legality of those head leases. And the impact of a successful challenge would be that the terminals of Ansett and Australian that have been provided to them under the head leases will revert to common user terminals under the ownership of the Federal Airports Corporation. And that is very important to us because at the moment we are tied to only having we are tied to being limited to 6 aeroplanes from which we can operate because of the limitation of those gates. Obviously, if we get better access, we'll be able to expand our fleet, and in that expansion we'll be able to introduce a second type of equipment, probably a 737, and that will enable us to move into Canberra, Tasmania, North Queensland ports and Central Australia. But it is very conditional upon whether our action is successful. But, you know, there's been a lot of toing and froing as to what should be done, how it ought to be done, and we can't sit back. We get accused at times of whinging. We don't want to be seen to be whinging, but if we don't stick up for ourselves, we're sure that no one else is going to stick up for us. And that was evidenced by the fact that when the Minister made his statement in October '87, he assured that it was going to be a level playing field. But it was only a few months later than that the airlines advised that they were acquiring the travel agents who held the public service travel contracts. Travelland went to Ansett, Westpac went to Australian Airlines, Coles Myer to Ansett, and so it went. And that immediately created a situation from which there was no level playing field. The problem occurred, of course, that the contracts given to the public service, it's claimed by the government and Public Service Commission that, of course, the public servant has the right to travel however he chooses. But you'd have to agree that the odds are against you when the person issuing the ticket is owned by one of those airlines. Now, it is our contention, particularly when those travel agencies move out into the suburban areas and the city areas, that they should not be permitted to trade under their travel agent's name. It ought to be clearly available to the people to know that when they move into a Travelland office or a Westpac office or a Coles Myer office, that they are dealing with either Ansett or Australian. To do otherwise is deceptive. We don't protest about the fact that they own travel agents. We do protest at the basis upon which the government contracts were awarded to them, but it is our contention that the Trade Practices Commission should move in to ensure that when they trade under their own name. That is what happens in the United States. American Airlines can operate a retail travel agent, but they can't operate under some pseudonym. They must operate under their own name, and that is what we would request. And we believe that under the Trade Practices Act, the remedy is already there. Another problem that is occurring at the moment, which does concern us, and this was referred to in the Australian Financial Review on last Friday, it has not yet been substantiated, is the fact that there is a move with the Australia Post to enter into a long-term contract, so it's alleged, with Australian Airlines. Now, I would have to question the propriety of that because Compass, Ansett and some 60 other potential airline operators, some of them just single-engine aeroplanes that might have carried mail between Charleville and Cunnamulla, for example, have tendered on a tender which ought to be confidential to Australia Post, expecting to be a part of the Australia Post mail contract. It's a $42 million contract, very important to all the airlines. But we learnt in the Financial Review that there was a deal going on behind closed doors which was going to stitch up the underfloor capacity of the Australian Airlines aircraft to Australia Post. But this is whilst the tender is still being considered. And I don't consider that ethical or reasonable in any mind. If the Australia Post wishes to do that, and incidentally, providing the story is correct, well, the tenders should be rescinded and everyone should be given a chance to participate in that. And I would pose a question. Is this because Australian Airlines are so short of funds that the government have decided they have to find some way to bolster their funds and therefore they have entered into a deal with Australia Post as a backdoor way of getting money into Australian Airlines. That's a question. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I'm a bit of a sceptic, and I just wonder if that could be so. If it is so, the further question has to be asked, is it being charged at economic rates? Because with privatisation, I wouldn't like to be the purchaser of Australian Airlines that suddenly moves in and finds that a 10-year or 5-year commitment has been made to sell space at an uneconomic rate on which I cannot get a return. And therefore there are a lot of questions to be answered in respect of that. If the Australian Financial Review article is wrong, Australia Post should come out and say so. And I think for the integrity of Australian Airlines, they should say whether they are or are not in discussions with Australia Post. If they are, have the prices which were tendered by Ansett, Compass, and the various other airlines around Australia, have they been used as part of the negotiating ploy to determine the rate at which that underfloor capacity will be sold? If it hasn't been sold, no problem, and we would hope, therefore, that this long outstanding tender is awarded, and I hope I haven't shot myself in the foot by protesting too much. Now, with the move and what has happened as far as the travel is concerned, I think there are some very favourable trends happening within Australia that we are seeing, and one of the most favourable from our point of view is that the effort which we made to stimulate traffic, particularly from Western Australia, where there was some 7,000 wide-body seats a week moving out of the West because they considered the airfares were too high, those passengers now are moving to Cairns, Gold Coast, Melbourne, Sydney. It's an untapped market. 7,000 wide-body seats a week was a significant market which was being lost to Australia and lost to the Australian tourist industry. Our competitors will tell you that they were inhibited. They couldn't reduce fares under the Independent Airfares Committee Act, which was rescinded in October '87. I'd have to say to you that's an absolute nonsense. There was no occasion when either Ansett or Australian applied for a decreased fare that it wasn't granted immediately, and there was simply nothing at any time to stop them from reducing the fares as they wished. The only time ever there was a case mounted to stop a decrease in fares was when East West Airlines in 1982 applied for a special fare between Melbourne and Sydney via Albury, and both airlines protested, took us to court and stopped us from charging that fare. But other than that, there was absolutely no reason why they could not have reduced the fares at any one time. So as we start to move around and look at tourism, it seems to be the only growth industry. I do believe that we have to ensure in Australia we do everything possible to encourage it. And one of the places where I'd suggest we could start is in Taipei. Now, I don't profess to know anything about foreign affairs, but to me it is ludicrous that United Airlines, for example, can fly into Taipei, and they can also fly into China, or American Airlines can fly to China. Japan Asia Airlines can fly to Taipei, and Japanese Airlines can fly into China. Cathay Pacific on a daily basis flies into Taipei. Why can't Qantas go in under their own name instead of going in under a charade such as Australian Asian Airlines? Why can't we just stand up and say, this is what we want? We've got our biggest trading partner, one of our largest trading partners here, and therefore we ought to be there because we need the tourist dollar, and I can tell you what, we need it pretty bad. One of the situations, of course, with Ansett and Australian, as I've said, have had a 16% growth for this last 9 months. It is necessary to improve the yield. There is never going to be a reversion to the high airfares that existed before. The very threat of deregulation is such that the costs are going to be contained to a much greater extent than they have in the past. There was never any incentive to contain costs in the past, and that is exampled, and I know that a lot of people here enjoy the facility, but that's exampled by the money that is wasted on flight decks and golden wing clubs. They cost money, they're being subsidised by the economy class passenger, and there's going to have to be a very close look at how those facilities are provided and what they do cost the public, because they are the types of things which have kept airfares up in the past. The honeymoon period which Australian and Ansett have had as a result of the pilot strike by introducing new pilots is about to come to a finish. It was always going to happen because there are already murmurings in different camps that fellas that were recruited for one particular low type, if you like, or low pay type of aircraft can now see that the fella flying the heavier airplane gets higher rates of pay, and he's going to want the progression to that higher type to get the higher pay, and it's only fair that he should get it. And that was basically the reason for the strike. It was these conditions which had been built into the system. No one has been a greater critic of pilots than myself. They took me to the wire on 3 different occasions. In East West Airlines, they just about sent us bankrupt. But I'd have to go on record as saying that this current recession, in my opinion, stems very greatly from that pilot strike. The businesses that went out on the North Queensland coast, Central Australia, Tasmania, are still bleeding. It's only in areas where Compass has been able to trigger an increase in growth, for example, Cairns, where at the moment you can't get a bed. Before April, you could get a whole hotel. But it's only in those areas where you're getting that type of growth. Now, with the pilots, during that period of time, they were criticised because they flew low hours. But that wasn't their fault. That was the fault of management and the basis upon which they'd structured their fleet and their bases. And now, as I say, they had a holiday whilst those pilots were recruited and joined at specific aircraft types. But the murmuring is on now, and that is going to cause cost. We're in a fortunate position that adopting exactly the same rules as existed before the pilot strike, we get 730 hours out of our pilots, whereas it was claimed back then that the competitors were only getting 350. It's now claimed they get 550. But our 730 hours is under the same basic rules as existed before the strike. And the reason we get that is because it's a one aircraft type operation with all of our pilots based at one centre. And this makes for great economics. 730 hours, $125,000 for the captain flying a 277-seat aeroplane is great economics, such that our estimate of our operating cost or available seat kilometre cost is 7.8 cents against our competitor 14.8 to 15.5. So we've got a lot of upside to continue with a few price-cutting campaigns if necessary. We would hope that there will be some common sense get back into the system and there'll be greater attention to yield, because I don't believe that our government competitor can continue to throw away government money, and I don't believe that our other competitors got the funds to do so either. But in any event, we're here to stay. We're now in profits. We've had our annual result, which was for 7 months trading, mentioned here today. During that period of time, we had some fairly horrendous aircraft delivery delays. Our 3rd and 4th were due to arrive in February, March. The 3rd didn't get here till after April, and the 4th, in fact, didn't arrive till the last week of August. And we introduced what became the 4th aircraft on the 1st of July. So because of those delays, it did impact upon our results. But we're very comfortable with the way we're going now. We've got a great team of people. In fact, I would say they're without compare. There's not a day that goes by that we're not getting congratulations for our service on the ground and in the air, even recognising the difficult conditions under which we do operate. But we believe that the airline industry, and I include, even though I've probably been a bit critical of our competitors here today, the combined effect of the airline industry is such that we have for the month, this August quarter, a growth of 34%. And on that basis, the future for Australian tourism is great. The future for all the airlines is great. And I'll just finish on a prediction that I would suggest that, subject to us not getting access to any further gates, that we will go through the next 4 or 5 years with 6 aeroplanes, and at the end of that 5 years, Ansett and Australian will be approximately double the size they are today. And on that basis, I will sit down and answer any questions you like.
Thank you, Bryan. It's nice to hear a speaker who not only keeps the journalists busy, but he's keeping the lobbyists busy as well. We have 5 questions from our media members, and we have about 30 minutes, so we may well throw it open to the general audience. If you do have questions, if you can contact Lee Catmull, who was there but doesn't seem to be here now. Our first question is from Brad Perrott. Name and organisation, please.
Mr. Grey, Bradley Perrott from the American group Knight Ridder. I have a couple of questions. Firstly, do you expect to make a profit next year?
Yes.
And which of your competitors would you expect to make a profit next year? And secondly, which of your competitors do you think is in the best financial